Hello everyone, good afternoon. I hope you had a good lunch and you are ready to learn more about, something called DeFi. But before we start the panel, I'll take a minute to give you a story. A story about a girl called Maria from Argentina and her friend from Venezuela facing inflations, skyrocketing inflations. And like a couple of years ago, what she did was she put all her savings that she made into DeFi and stable coin and started earning yields. Guess what? 2 years later, she has not only hedged herself from the crisis, but also made a lot of money. So how many in the audience, which we have 20, 30, how many of you think, raise of hands, that DeFi can bank the underbanked and can really give financial freedom? Great. Okay, let's just stay for another story. So another software developer from India made $20,000 a year, and you know what? Put all this money in a protocol that was backed by the topmost VCs. Some of you have already seen in the last 2 days, and had all the audited done. But guess what? An exploit happened. No ownership. No one took the responsibility. All $20,000 gone. What happened? The developer lost the money and is now in depression. So do you think, and in this audience, how many of you think that DeFi is still not there where it has to be to give banking to the large audience with this story? So 2. Great. So we have more advocates. Great. With that, let's introduce with a big round of applause our panelist, Sebastian from Interops. We have Brian from Chorus One. And we have Peter from Black Alpha. Peter, I still cannot pronounce your last name, man. All right, so let's start with Brian. Brian, I think a lot of people already know you, so we can skip the introduction, but over to you. What's with your experience in blockchain interoperability? And what are the technical and infrastructure hurdles that must be overcome for DeFi and TradeFi to effectively merge?
So, I don't know, that feels like a bunch of different questions. So, I mean, let me just answer the last one. Like, for what has happened for DeFi and TradFi to merge? I mean, I think, first of all, what's cool about DeFi is that, you can build protocols and you can build protocols on top of protocols. So I think that level of open innovation, permissionlessness, composability is, super powerful. So, and then that's just something that's not possible in TradFi. So I think what we're seeing in DeFi is you have a ton of innovations that are happening that unlock, new capabilities, new features, and that I think is moving at a much faster pace in TradFi. And I think those innovations, though, will be very attractive to apply to TradFi assets as well. So what is needed for DeFi and TradFi to merge? I think it's really that TradFi assets have to come on chain and can then use those whole DeFi innovations and capabilities. And I think that is happening, right? We see it in things like Ondo, Mantra, all these different protocols bring DeFi assets on chain and RWA assets on chain. And I think that's really a tremendous unlock. And then probably what will also be needed is, some more kind of compliance type features that I think a lot of these RWA projects are building, but that will basically allow to get, the innovations of DeFi to merge with TradFi. And I think in the end game is that, really most of finance it's going to be on chain, right? Because it's just going to be more powerful, more composable, move faster than in the TradFi world. Now, okay, briefly on interoperability. I think interoperability is progressing at a pretty good rate, right? So, I mean, in the past that was, a problem. But today, we have Layer 0, Wormhole, Axelar, Chainlink, so many different protocols. They're maturing. We used to see a lot of hacks. It's actually been quite a while that we had a big bridge hack. Now, I'm not saying it's not going to happen again, probably will, but I think there's a lot of progress there. And now the user experience around interoperability is still pretty bad, but I think that's very solvable. And, maybe in 1 or 2 years. So I don't think interoperability is going to be a huge bottleneck here. But there's still obviously a lot of work. Also, I think the whole chain abstraction thing is going to be very powerful for that.
Yeah, and you're right on how TradFi would come to DeFi's by bringing these assets. However, sort of have a disagreement with interoperability because we were in Davos in Switzerland. I was talking to someone from a TradFi world. He said, "Yeah, I tried to use use layer zero and wormhole. You know what? It took me 30 minutes to do that transaction. And you know what? I was so afraid that all these money, how is it even happening? The UX was so counterintuitive that I think there's a long way to go for interoperability. But Sebastian, but like Brian said, the TradeFi asset has to come on chain. How do you see this coming from the TradeFi background?
I don't have a TradFi background.
I think
I want to make that clear.
You look like it though.
I look,
You
I might
look the
like
most
it. I play the
TradFi
part real
person.
well. Yeah. No, I'm a technologist. So funny stories. I mean, for those who don't know, Brian and I started a podcast 12 years ago called Epicenter, and so I've learned most of what I know about finance from him. So,
That's concerning.
No, but like I think like to Brian's point, and I'll get to your question. Is like we have the assets and we have the technology. So TradFi has like like the world's assets living and being transacted on this like legacy rails, and then crypto has new asset classes that are mostly digital, like untangible asset classes that live on this new on these new rails. And so to your to Brian's point, like these assets, the real world assets, need to come on chain. And I think one way I like to think about this is going back and looking at the evolution of e-commerce. Before the 1990s, we had commerce. It was done with particular infrastructure, and then commerce didn't change. It just went on new rails, and now we have like a digital economy and commerce and sort of trade happens at a much faster pace with a lot more volume. So it's interesting to look at that from a historical perspective and how that might overlap onto crypto. Your question was about.
The question was about, we are talking about bringing TradeFi assets to on-chain. Since you have told us that you don't come from that much of a TradeFi background, what do you think is a major challenge and hurdle that these assets are not coming on-chain? We're talking about RWA.
I think the main kind of divide between TradFi and crypto is that TradFi has its frameworks for how to ensure security, safety, compliance of that stack. And crypto starts from a very different place. And so a lot of the considerations that people have about TradFi regarding things like AML, KYC, compliance, traceability of assets, travel rules, and these sorts of things, politicians and policymakers and regulators and so on and so forth in the TradFi industry want to try to put crypto in that box, but it doesn't work. It's like putting a round hole through a square peg, because crypto doesn't need a lot of those solutions to be able to assure traceability of funds. Yeah. We have that through just everything being on chain. Yeah. For things like compliance, there can be new novel systems that allow people to use their digital identity to transact on chain permissionlessly through things like zero knowledge, etc., without having to reveal all of their information. And so I think thinking about crypto and trying to put it in a TradFi frame doesn't really work. And that's what's been slowing, I think, adoption of
exactly.
TradFi into crypto.
I think that brings my question to Peter. Peter, you have been in the investments, investing in DeFi protocols for quite a long time. What innovation do you see happening that can change this problem that he mentioned about DeFi, putting crypto to TradFi is not really happening. It's slowing down because of a lot of reasons. So what are you seeing? What kind of trends and innovation are you seeing today?
Okay, it can be either technical or even regulatory-wise can be innovation, and I think we need some kind of innovation in regulation as well. So yeah. So for example, KYC, as you mentioned, it can be done on chain. It can be done differently, but those traditional TradFi guys, they will need it. They will not bring their assets or massive asset classes unless they are sure they are selling it to people who are KYC. So for me, probably regulation. It's the biggest one, and another innovation, the easy one for retail especially, is just better UX and maybe intent-based DeFi. It's kind of also helping in that way. So just make it easier.
Great. Brian, he mentioned about UX, right? Now, in the name of UX, a lot of time we oversee the centralization aspect, right? These protocols say that because we have to make it UX friendly, so we see a lot of volumes on centralized exchanges. But on the contrary, we are yet to see a mainstream adoption happening on the DEXs. So, do you think that we are risking centralization on the name of UX?
Well, I don't know, risking, right? It's people build centralized system and people build decentralized system, and then obviously the centralized system, it's much easier to create a great UX. And I think for a lot of people, that's just, I mean, first of all, it's the easiest place to go, right? If you just get started, you just go on Binance, you don't have to worry about private keys. And then the other thing is there's the most liquidity there. But I actually think the most innovation is on the decentralized side. And the kind of composability that I was mentioning before, well, that's possible on the decentralized side to a greater degree than on centralized exchanges. Now, in centralized exchanges, maybe there'll still be some things where you can use some asset as collateral, like FTX had the thing, right, where you have like a single margin account, and so there's still some things there. But I think a lot of the innovation is on the DeFi side. And let's say if you want to earn yield on your assets, maybe on stable coins or something, right? Then, well, the easiest way to do it might be on the centralized exchange, but the highest yield opportunities and the most, clever and innovative things, those will be on the decentralized side. So I think we are seeing, more opportunities, higher yields on chain. We have more liquidity and better user experience on off chain. But I think the user experience challenges are very solvable. Now, they're not necessarily easy to solve, and I get your point before, and it's going to take time, but they will be solved. And I think and then other things like liquidity, performance, I think this is all going to improve as well. So I think in the long run, I think we're going to see the on-chain economy grow tremendously. But of course, that doesn't mean that Binance, I'm sure, is going to stay enormous, and Coinbase is going to be enormous, and I think that's going to remain the case. But I'm very bullish that I think just that level of composability and open innovation that's possible on chain is not possible in centralized exchanges, and I think that's what's going to drive the rate of change, and that's why it's going to keep growing and accelerating.
Yeah, that's a very good answer. So Sebastian, do you agree to what Brian said, first of all? Or
Yeah, I agree. I think that what centralized exchanges attempt to do is to create a system that looks a lot like TradFi for crypto assets. One analogy here might be early Netflix. Early Netflix, for those who don't know, was a DVD delivery service. So you'd order your DVDs and you'd get them at home, and then you'd send them back. But the real innovation was when everything went online and all the content went online. And then you have new content, like Netflix produced content that is native to the platform. So from that perspective, right, centralized exchanges don't produce a lot of innovation. They've taken existing rails and they've put new types of assets on them. But the real innovation happens when you have truly composable systems, but also assets that are truly digitally native. So one of the things I'm really interested in is the advent of native on-chain stablecoins that are backed by things like Bitcoin, or by even digital representation of treasuries, where you have this digitally native asset that is born on chain, lives on chain, and has never had that interface with the traditional world.
there's a question that has come up, and even CZ tweeted about it a few years ago, about that because all of these decentralized protocol governance are run by people who stake the most. So this is a question to all three of you. We'll start with an answer in yes and no first, and then explanation. Do you think influx of traditional capital, which will be magnanimous in nature as compared to the retail capital, will take away the decentralized ethos of decentralized governance. Although it will be still happening, who has the biggest capital will be still making a decision, but because in this case it will be the traditional capital which is huge as compared to retail. So starting with Peter, do you think it's taking away the decentralization ethos?
Uh, I think for sure it will take some. So yes, you said one word, right? Yes.
Okay. And do you like to add anything there? Like,
Yeah. Now, okay. Yeah, just by technical, basically how it works, right? MakerDAO definitely you can influence the governance in other protocols as well if you hold enough tokens, and the amount of capital is very different in TradeFi than in DeFi. Like it's still in RWA, for example, it's order of magnitude. It's like 1,000 or more. So
yeah,
definitely this can influence the governance.
this can influence. Brian?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, I think this kind of capital will be more concerned about, compliance, KYC, and I think that will have an impact on protocols.
Sebastian?
I'm going to give a yes and no answer. So governance is a tool, it's a technology, and it can be used for lots of different applications. So if you want to start a DAO with your friends and deploy capital in whatever thing you're interested in, that's a decentralized autonomous organization that is decentralized, and you decide on the governance rules for that organization. Now, I think maybe your question is more like, are large L1s going to lose a little bit of that decentralized nature? Well, yeah, if more institutional capital comes in and that capital has more power in those systems, then we might lose some of that. But I think it's up to us as people in the industry to try to preempt that by creating systems that are going to ensure that it's a more equal playing field for all of the stakeholders, including the teams that are building on those, but also the capital allocators, the developers, etc.
So to summarize this point, I think it'll be safe to say that although we are all advocates of decentralization, at least 90% of us sitting in this room in blockchain, but when we talk about that, the way to mainstream adoption is bringing in traditional capital, but it's a double-edged sword. On one side, we'll have more attention from the traditional institutions, but at the same time, the protocols will be controlled and not controlled, I think influenced by a lot of how these TradeFi institutions think. And that will again make rules that are not in the favor of the community. So this could be a possibility. I'm not saying this would happen, but all three, yes, do say that it takes away a decentralization ethos. Yes, I guess that was a good summary.
It's like I think decentralization is maybe not the right, like what we like about blockchains is verifiability, censorship resistance, the permissionless nature. Now, you can build those presumably with like less decentralization than what is ideal if you have things like zero knowledge, right? I mean, it's a trade-off, right? Like, so you either want censorship resistance, or you want speed, or you want security, and you can pick two of those things. And some blockchains like opt to be on one side of that spectrum. Other blockchains will opt for others, and traditional capital may choose to go towards like some of those properties, and there'll be more other systems that will be more decentralized. Like Bitcoin is a good example where it has been very conservative because it really favors censorship resistance and liveness. Other systems have
that's
other
actually
considerations.
Bitcoin is a good example of the contrarian theory to what we discussed, right?
Or Solana on the other side, right? That you go for speed and you are sacrificing a little bit of decentralization.
Yes.
And you are kind of okay with that.
Yeah. So, Peter, one trend that you think will become obsolete in DeFi in the next 1 year?
Will become obsolete.
Obsolete. Yes. That's currently going, but you think will become obsolete. I mean, this is to address the people that are building in this room, right? What shouldn't they not be focusing on?
Oh, that's a tricky one. Do you guys have any idea on this one?
Do you think
We are focusing more on it's gonna be,
Do you think, Brian, would you like
in
to take
trend.
this?
Yeah, I'm thinking too, you know.
That's very
World
tricky one.
Liberty Financial.
Sorry.
Okay, yeah, let's hope that this one.
At least I hope so.
Do you think Dexes is we have had enough of them, or do you think more innovation would come in?
Definitely more innovation. No, I think in the end, exchange is by far the biggest market, as one can see from, profits of Binance and stuff. And in the end, I think even CZ said that, no? That like, oh, someday, DEXs will be much greater than sexes and stuff. So like, I think eventually it should be possible to build DEXs that will become even larger than the biggest centralized exchanges. So I think the price here is enormous. So I'm sure this is going to continue to remain one of the biggest areas of innovation and activity investment in crypto, probably for decades.
I mean, we don't have a high throughput order book exchange on
Yeah.
chain, and like whoever cracks that first.
And we still don't have limit order books, like high throughput limit order books.
Yeah,
right?
Somewhat.
but like high throughput, like compete with
Sure.
Binance, right?
Yeah, and that too decentralized. I mean, there are a lot of centralized order books for limit orders. So, Peter, coming back to you, I'm not going to leave you.
Shoot.
So, what trend do you think would prevail more in the next 1 year in DeFi? Like, for example, to give you a context, if you talk about RW today, 97.2% capital is in G6, right, or T-bills. The remaining 3.2 is everything we talk about, Ondo, Maple, other than G6. What do you think is stopping that, and what kind of innovation do you think can change this percentage ratio?
Okay, so for this one, I think again the regulation is clear answer, and I think this will really change. For me, like things like private credit, that's probably the most, but other asset classes, they will definitely come because people are looking for a higher yield than 4%, right? So it's definitely can bring a lot of great yield to DeFi, if you put it like that. And especially outside of the peak of the cycle, that would be pretty important.
Brian, we talk about VC, venture capital investments, and one of the problems is what's promised is not delivered, and then there is a lot of money that's spent recklessly, which leads to bad advocacy of the industry. What regulation do you think can change this? And this is not particular to DeFi, by the way. It's industry as a whole.
Yeah, I really don't believe that regulation can or should even try to change that. It's just the nature. It's just the nature of things, right? That people, I think even in the traditional space, you have something like 9 out of 10 startups fail, or 8 out of 10, or something like that. So people try things and they have dumb ideas, or they don't execute well, or they waste money. And I think that's the nature of innovation. And I think if there was something that regulators could potentially do that I think could be reasonable, would be to mandate, some kind of disclosure type, right? Where you're like, maybe things on, token distribution or so. But I think it's a dangerous path, because then you're like, I don't know. But in the end, I think if you look back, like ICOs are, one of the greatest things in crypto, right? That like, and people at the time were in 2017, 18. Of course, at the height of the bubble, there was a lot of like weird stuff. But if you look back, so much great stuff was funded by ICOs, and anyone could participate. And now we're seeing also, right, it's coming back more and more, where everyone is trying to do something like that. So I think generally, I don't think it should be the role of regulation to try to stop people from, having dumb ideas and implementing them.
Okay, so to sort of bring this to all a conclusion, one regulation, I know you talked about anti-regulations, but one regulation, Sebastian, that you think can change or trigger a growth of DeFi adoption?
Yeah, I agree with Brian. I think like regulation is not the path to adoption. I think institutions should use crypto if they should use crypto rails and blockchain rails if it improves their processes, if it improves the overall system. I think most are not for political reasons and sort of compliance reasons, which is kind of political. I've got a whole thing on KYC and compliance I could get into at some other point, but yeah, I think the best way to move DeFi forward is not to regulate it heavily, and I think that like what's happened in Europe with Mika, for instance, okay, didn't include DeFi within its scope, but effectively limits DeFi's ability to enter into the centralized exchange market and therefore the onboarding flow because it cannot be compliant. You know, MakerDAO, which I think is one of the really interesting innovations in DeFi, is not permitted on European centralized exchanges because it cannot comply with the regulations in place. So I hope that the US will take a more balanced approach, either by having a very innovation-friendly framework or some sandboxes where DeFi can really truly thrive.
Yeah. Yeah, you go ahead.
I can give an answer to that. I mean, this is not exactly regulation, but I do think tax rules matter quite a lot, because I think if you do DeFi stuff, then taxes can become extremely complicated. Now, of course, people living here in Dubai are very fortunate, right? Because you don't have to worry about any of this stuff. And
For us poor Europeans and Americans.
well, I mean, I live in Portugal, which is also very good in this regard, because you also don't have to. But in many places, it can be a big issue, and then you either spend, weeks on tax declaration, huge amount of work, and so I think that is one thing where some kind of simple ways of reporting taxes and reasonable tax rules will help a lot.
Okay. Yeah. So just a minute so that we conclude with Peter. Peter, one startup trend that you would invest your money in the next 6 months in DeFi could be one line.
In DeFi, okay, private credit. Private credit.
Private credit tokenization. Great. I think that was quite an insightful session for me at least, and I hope it was for you as well. We learned about few things, that regulations is not really mandatory for DeFi adoption. Two, we are looking at a lot of tokenization of different instruments. And sorry?
No, it's just
Okay.
thumb up, thumb down.
Oh, okay. And we'll see a lot of DEXs coming in with more innovation. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Rishabh.